Welcome to another episode of Perspique, where curiosity meets perspective. And I'm your host, Debotraya Rakshit. Today we are privileged to host Professor Lionel Page, am I right? A distinguished behavioral economist and professor of economics at the University of Queensland. He's also the director of Centre for Unified Behavioural and Economic Sciences. Sir holds a Ph.D. from Paris School of Economics and has an impressive track record of research exploring how people make decisions, alone and in groups, by blending insights from economic theories, game theory, and psychology. His work has been widely recognized and covered in top international media, and he's also the author of the acclaimed book Optimally Irrational. We'll dive into groundbreaking research on loss aversion, strategic decision making, and how evolutionary perspective reshape our understanding of human behavior. Get ready for a stimulating conversation with one of the leading voices of behavioral economics. Welcome back to Perspique, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Sir. Coming back to India since our last international workshop on behavioral economics in January, how has your experience been in the international conference of behavioral economics so far?
This international conference 2025 here at Christ University, I'm very impressed by the quality, the size of the conference, the number of attendants, the quality of the participants, the quality of the organization. So all that is really, I think it's a great event. Very happy to be here.
Okay, sir. And we'll walk right into your recent work, which was your article on how arguments really make people change political sides. I think it was published in August 2025.
Yeah.
So it suggests that political views often arise from social group loyalties and reputational incentives rather than impartial reasoning. Could you explain why rational arguments frequently fail to change people's minds, particularly in highly polarized political environments?
Yeah, we tend to think that we have a reason in our faculty to form judgments, to rigorously, logically, etc. We tend to think that it's here to help us find the truth. There's this famous movie by Stanley Kubrick in 2001, Space Odyssey, where at the start you have these big apes who are ancestors, and they don't look very smart, and then suddenly there's a black monolith, and when they touch the monolith, eventually they become, more intelligent, and they start using tools, etc. And so we tend to think that reason is this thing, this specifically human faculty, and it helps us be better at interacting the world, doing science, technology, etc. But it's likely that actually reason was not didn't emerge and was not selected in humans for being right, being truthful, finding the truth. When you think about what are the kind of problems that our ancestors have faced most often and that had the most impact on their success, it's not necessarily solving actual problems, objective problems with nature, it's solving problems with other people, solving social problems. If you think about your everyday lives, how often do you solve a problem using reason? How often do you repair a computer, or do you repair your, even your sink, which is blocked, or how often you use it sometimes. But when you think about it, most of the problems you have to face is talking to other people, convincing other people, understanding other people. And so your reason really is used most of the time to deal with social problems. Now when you think about that, what is success in this social problem? It's convincing other people, convincing them to be your friends, not your enemies, to be your mate maybe, to trust you, to work with you, etc. And so that means that our reason was not selected for us to think as scientists, to find the truth, but to think as lawyers, to defend our case, to convince people, trust me, work with me, cooperate with me, etc. And once you understand that, it really explains a lot of what we could think of biases about how we reason, because we do not reason to find the truth. We reason to convince other people. And so when you put that understanding in the context of politics, then now convincing other people is that you will, if you have polarization, you will be part of a group. And then not only you're the lawyer for yourself, but you will become the lawyer of your group. So now when you have political arguments, we argue a lot, but why do they often fail? Why is it very, very hard to convince other people, to change the political views of other people? It's because, you are a lawyer if you're in a group, and if I'm in another group, I'm a lawyer. Two lawyers, they don't work to be convinced by the other party. Their goal is to defend whatever they're defending, not to be convinced by the other party. And so I think that's the reason why it's very hard to convince people when there is polarization. And it's only when that, what you see is that often people will change their views, not when you have just pure, very strong evidence, very rational arguments which are put forward, but it's when they have the situation when they eventually decide to switch group, to switch allegiance. So maybe you're in a group, but suddenly you start wondering whether you should be in this group, whether your subgroup in this group is treated nicely by the bigger group in this group. And if you decide that maybe you want to switch, and coalitions are very flexible, for people switch, you switch allegiance, then that's when you're more willing and interested in hearing different arguments. So, if you look at the strategies that people use to convince others, you observe that often, beside the raw rational arguments, there's a lot of coalition negotiation. I'm going to tell you that I'm not saying that to be against you. Actually, this principle is something that you would agree on. In your group, they agree on these principles, so you see you should agree with myself. So you negotiate, like what you negotiate in political debates is not just arguments, a position like abstract philosophical position. It is coalition positions, like peer coalition belonging. Are you with me or against me? And once you understand that, you understand why it's so sticky. Political positions are very sticky, very hard to change, and also you appreciate the kind of situations where eventually they change.
So that is very fascinating insight. It really reframes the challenge from pure persuasion to one navigating group identity and also social incentives. Sir, you have illuminated us with rational arguments in the recent international conference, which is again very insightful. Could you please break down for our listeners and our viewers where you mentioned argumentative norms and how they affect one's reputation in an argument, and how these norms affect our, per se, day-to-day arguments?
Sure. Arguments is things we do all the time. So we have, at one hand, like the political arguments, but this is just one, and you argue with your partner, who's going to do the dishes, or where you go on holidays, etc. So, and argument doesn't have to be like very conflictual. It could just be a discussion of what do you think, and you have a slight uncertainty about what to do. And what what do we do when we argue? You can apply a framework from game theory of thinking that when you argue, we have plenty of opportunities when we argue. You are trying to resolve some type of conflict. When I say conflicts, it might seem as a big word, but conflicts are not necessarily wars and big fights. Is that conflict is just that people desires, people preferences are not always exactly the same. We're not clones. So once you appreciate that, let's say you and me were deciding what to do over the weekend and we're friends, and you might prefer to go to the arcade to play video games, and I might prefer maybe to go to watch a football match at the stadium. And the question, you have this slight preference, I have this slight preference, we want to do it together, right? So it's not that, so there is an element of cooperation, we want to agree, but at the same time we have slightly different preferences. So you might want to argue in favor of the arcade. You want to convince me that it's a good stuff to do, and maybe I'll try to argue that the football match is more exciting. And so we have a lot of these situations every day. If we're friends, we repeat this kind of situation. We have a lot of decisions to make, and we don't want exactly the same thing, and we have to negotiate what do we do. And one thing you can understand from game theory is that when you have a lot of repeated situations like that, you can actually do very well by adopting some general rules to cooperate. So instead of haggling every day, what do we do? And we spend time, and maybe we get angry because we disagree. So maybe we could agree on some general principles of how do we do to settle these issues. And if we do that, we can do stuff together, benefit from the fact that we do stuff together all the time, and so there are hard benefits. Now, one key issue about the things that you disagree is that often the best decisions depend on external things. So for instance, like if we consider between the arcade and going to see a football match, maybe it depends on the weather. So if it's raining, the football match is a worse option, and maybe if it's sunny, it's a better option. So one thing that when we might argue about the reality out there. Is it likely to be sunny or is it likely to be rainy? And it might be better for us over the long run, as we have all these situations, that when we argue, we tend to find the truth. That if it's more likely to be sunny, we tend to agree that it's likely to be sunny, and then when it's raining, we'll tend to agree that it's likely to be rainy. If it was the reverse, then we would make wrong decisions. So these rules that you can think help us cooperate together. When we argue, you would want to have rules which allow us to reach the right conclusions and at quickly, so that we don't fight too much when we disagree. And what I presented here at the conference is that you can think of all the rules that we follow when we talk to each other, and we are not often not aware of it because it comes so naturally to us. But we have a whole architecture of rules which help us manage seamlessly this kind of situations. So I presented 4 types of rules, and these 4 types of rules allow us to quickly agree, be more likely to find the truth, and not spend ages talking haggling over every situation. So first type of rule is the fact that we often don't appreciate, but in every utterance we make, like as I'm speaking now, we try to be cooperative by being to be optimally useful for the other speaker. So what is optimally useful? Well, when you say something to somebody else, and it could be something in politics, could be something at home, usually you try to provide the best information possible given what the other person knows. So you need to be aware that you want to provide useful information in the sense that some information is something that's going to change your belief. So I need to be aware of what you know, what you care, what's useful to you. And I'm going to say something which is going to help change your beliefs in a way which is useful to you. So if knowing the weather, if you want to get out and knowing the weather is useful to you, I'm going to tell you about the weather. That's going to change your beliefs. This is good for you. If you don't plan to go out, maybe I don't need to talk to you about the weather. You say like, well, Lionel is talking to me about that. If I tell you something you already know, you might find me boring. So I'm useful when I tell you something which changes your beliefs in a way which is useful to you. At the same time, the way I'm conveying this information, I'm going to try to make it in the simplest way possible, with few words, so that you don't have to process this information over a long time. So linguists call that relevance. Relevance is the optimal usefulness at minimal cost. Okay, and we do that all the time. So when you look at how people talk to each other, they actually are very cooperative without often realizing this, but trying to be very relevant. What are failures of relevance? Well, if you ask me a simple question and I speak for half an hour, I'm taking too much of your time. I should shrink the amount of things I say, so that would not be relevant. If you ask me a question and I start using very technical terms and I speak in lingo and it's very hard to understand it, I'm making very hard for you. The cost of processing is hard for you. I'm not being relevant. So you can see that we try to avoid that. And what I said before is that these rules that we follow when we argue, they are rules, they are what we call in game theory equilibria of the games we play. And what it means equilibria is that we have an interest to play them. When everybody follows the rules, you have an interest to follow the rules. And why do you have an interest to follow the rules? Because if you violate the rule, then you pay a price. And what is the price when you look at rules of argumentation? It's a reputational price. So if you talk to me, and whenever you talk to me, I give you a lecture of half an hour of this, you'll find it boring, and you'll go to tell your friends, Lionel, avoid Lionel, because you're going to be endless discussions for, and so I will have a bad reputation. And if I have a bad reputation, then I will lose the opportunity to talk with other people and to solve problems with arguments. So that's the key thing. So I gave the example of the discursive norms, which are cooperation, and then there's plenty of other norms. Our norms, for instance, about fascinating things are the norms of managing conversation, like turn taking. You look at people in a group, 3, 4, 5. It's amazing how there is very rarely long silence. People quickly come back in the discussion. People don't interrupt too much each other. So there are implicit rules, but and you appreciate that there are rules when they are violated. Somebody who interrupts everybody will be seen as being rude. Somebody who and when there is nobody saying anything, somebody doesn't say anything. So it's not participating. So you have these rules. So I'll stop here because I already took quite a bit. But you have all these type of rules which explain how we manage to handle conversations, how we navigate arguments, and why it's in our interest to do so. Because if you're not following these rules, you have a bad reputation as somebody who is not a good discussant, and people will not want to talk to you.
So essentially, we have to keep track of our arguments. We have to keep knowing that we can't go too long. We have to be relevant. We have to stick to the point.
You have to stick to the point. I mean, there are other norms, like you have to use correct arguments. So if I was going to you talk to me about science. If I was to mention astrology, for instance, as an argument, you'd be like, that's not a good type of argument. So this is another type of norm that I would be violating. And we care a lot about respecting these norms, and we care a lot about being seen as, and when you see a lot of people talk to each other, a lot of what they say is to try to make sure that they are perceived as being fair and talking in good faith, being respectful of the other people when they talk to each other, etc. That's a lot of what's happening. And what's fascinating is that we are very, very good at doing that. We are often very oblivious of the fact that we are doing that. So we are oblivious about the complex layers of strategic interactions taking place in discussions. But once you understand that, you appreciate why, computers, it's very hard for computers to do the same thing. So, in the 90s, we were able to do computers beating Grandmaster in chess. Okay, I think it's 96 or 95 that Big Blue beats Kasparov. And you need to wait 30 years for computers to be able to speak like human beings. Right? So you would have thought that being a Grandmaster in chess is harder than having this kind of chit-chat conversation. But actually, chit-chat conversation is very, very complex. We have layers of strategic interaction. I need to understand what you know, to think what is the best way of presenting the information. I know that, and when you listen to what I'm saying, to interpret it, you know that I expect to say something given what I think you know. So we have kind of mind reading, you reading my mind, me reading your mind. So we have this recursive mind reading. This is very, very complex. And then we can appreciate why computers have been struggling to match the human ability to have this kind of natural conversation.
Okay, so for that. And I think it will be a good segue to the next question, which is based on your recent study again, was political polarization, wage inequality, and preference for redistribution, which had over 9,000 respondents from 6 countries, and it finds that most people underestimate wage inequality. They provide, even after being provided information, it has minimal effect, except for one key group, the far-right group.
Yeah.
So, whose support for redistribution has increased significantly. This completely overturned expert predictions who would think that no, this group is ideologically fixed. So what made them so responsive to this specific information?
Look, we don't know why they were specifically responsive to this information, but what we have different countries, and we know the level of wage inequality in the country, and we know that often people have underestimate or overestimate, depends, but often people don't have the right understanding of the level of inequality. So we correct their views by giving them the accurate information, and really we want to see how correcting their views by providing them with accurate information change their, happiness or unhappiness with the current political system. That does it make you think, oh, I was criticizing the government, but things are not that bad, so it's fine. Or the country says, oh well, it's worse than I thought, so I'm very angry with the government. And as you say, and it's something that has been found in similar studies, it's interesting that providing correct information doesn't change very much people's views. You could think that if people have wrong views about inequality, when you correct them, then it would change their political views, because maybe, for instance, if you're on the left and you say, well, we need to tax people who are wealthy, is because you think that there's a lot of inequality. So if I tell you, actually, there's not so much inequality, you might change your view. But what we find is that, no, usually it doesn't change people's view very much. That's an interesting fact. The fact, though, is, as you pointed out, there is a subset of people on the far right, people who state themselves, to place themselves on the far right, when you ask them. And they get kind of more angry with the system when we reveal to them that there's a bit more inequality than they thought. And so I think that's interesting. We observe all across the world at the moment, in Western countries, we see India as a political system which should be different. But in Western countries in particular, when you have a left-wide opposition, which is traditionally, historically articulated around redistribution, between working class left-wing parties and kind of conservative, more laissez-faire right-wing parties. So recently, you had a shift where you have more far-right parties, often who have a popular voting base, right? Popular voters who maybe 40 years ago were voting for communist parties or socialist parties. In many countries, they have, as a group, switched to vote for far-right parties. And so there is something like a populism, a kind of a resentment against the system, you can say, an anti-establishment feeling in many voters. And so we're not sure exactly why, but it seems that when we provide information, people see that there is maybe more inequality than they thought. They get, maybe they feel vindicated in their criticism of the overall system. So that's maybe our best case.
So last time when you were on Perspique, we spoke about your person journey into behavioral economics. How has working on this large-scale cross-cultural project, which has produced such a surprising result, changed your own perspective on the field and the potential of the evidence to change one?
Yeah, as I was saying before, we use our minds or reason as lawyers, not as scientists, and I think that the fact that it's hard to change people's mind when you give them evidence is an illustration of that. That is, we tend to think that people say, I have my political position because, I believe this, I believe that, I believe this. But once you understand that political positions are in a large part driven by coalitional belonging. So you're born in a social setting. Your parents have beliefs, you have a social network that naturally puts you in a kind of, more likely to be part of on the left or on the right in your country. And you might do your own choice as you grow up and you choose but you belong to a group. And often the views and ideas that you have politically, it's not the views that makes you belong to a group, it's your belonging to a group which makes you adopt the views of the group. Okay? So now, if you have these views, and as part of the group, you might be interested and curious about what are the kind of thing which you should be thinking, or what other people in your group think. And so you learn new things, and your views become more and more coherent and consistent with other people from your coalition. So if it's the case, then when I come and I provide you evidence, well, yeah, maybe I provide you evidence which is against this kind of view, which is part of the group, but this view is not the reason why you're part of the group. You're first part of the group, and then you adopt the views. So maybe that's why, thinking that I'm going to convince you to switch because I provide you a view. No, because your belonging is deeper. It's the choice to be social ties. You're embedded in groups and networks. It can be very costly to abandon your group. Like you might lose friends, you might lose opportunities, etc. And so I think that's a fact, that we overestimate the importance of rational arguments and rational views as driving political affiliation.
So social identity has been underestimated previously.
Yeah, so social identity, group identity is a key driver of and you can choose your group, right? But once you choose it, you drive your choice of adopting or rejecting views. I think that's the key. And I think it has been not ignored in psychology. It's a big topic of research in psychology. It has been until recently ignored in economics until like last 10, 15 years. But now economists are catching up. So we're really interested in that group identity, what happens, how it is formed, how it affects behavior. Yeah, we're really interested in this.
Okay. Professor, I think you would agree that research can be at times a challenging endeavor, but again, it's a fulfilling one. So what advice would you have for the Indian students who want to research on behavioral economics?
Very interesting. Well, I think so behavioral economics is kind of not new anymore. It was new like 20 years ago, newish 20 years ago topic. It's this topic at the crossroads of mainstream economics and psychology. So we still keep from economics plenty of important insights about incentives and strategies, and people have a lot of agency. Which is key because you have other social sciences where often the focus is on social pressure, social constraints. So economics try to understand people as agents, make decisions. But at the same time, the formal models from economics often were a bit simplistic. So, people look a bit like computers, like silly computers, or maybe like if you watch the Big Bang Theory, like Sheldon, not very social, not showing a lot of emotions. And clearly there are some limitations because people don't behave like that. So with the psychology, behavioral economics, with the insight from psychology and the framework from economics, we have very much better understanding about really how people behave. And we can talk about how people behave politically, like voters, how consumers behave, how students behave when they choose courses, etc. It's very, very general. So if students in India are interested in this, I think the key is to acquire material, to read about it. Obviously, if they have course in the university, that's great. But if not, you have textbooks on behavioral economics. It's relative to some other parts of economics. I would say the entry cost is relatively lower. So economics is always a bit more technical than some other social sciences, but behavioral economics is, I would say, not too hard to get in. I could here mention my book, because I think if you are new to economics or to behavioral economics, my book is really kind of an introduction to behavioral economics with a specific perspective, which is that I'm trying to explain why a lot of the biases or the weird way we behave have good, deep reasons when you take an evolutionary perspective. So there's a specific angle to my book, Optimally Irrational. I think, generally I think it's a good entry point to the literature, but you have other textbooks in behavioral economics. I think that's the first thing to do, follow courses, and then you have a training in behavioral economics. You have some of them in Australia, but one which is really good if you want to go to the UK, if you're willing to go to the UK, in Warwick, they have excellent master in behavioral and psychology and economics, which is behavioral economics, and you have a few others. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you so much, sir, for that informative podcast. That did not only change our perspectives towards behavioral economics, but also helped us to get a direction for applying it in our day-to-day lives. We have journeyed through some truly thought-provoking ideas, exploring how our social loyalties shape our political views, why the so-called irrational behaviors can actually be optimal adaptations, and how loss aversion influences the strategic decisions we make in groups. Professor Page's insights, grounded in evolutionary theory and game theory, offer powerful tools to better understand human behavior in complex and social and economic settings, especially relevant for our diverse and dynamic society in India. Thank you so much for joining us on Perspique. Stay curious, stay questioning, and we look forward to welcoming you back to our next episode, where we'll explore more of the forces shaping our economic choices and the future of policy.